I'm here with Cheryl Walker, and she did something that is a pastor's delight. She came up to me and she said, "I'd be quite interested in telling my story." And you know, the reason why that was delightful is because anybody who knows Cheryl will know that she's not a person who is usually puts herself forward. She's usually a person that sort of is in the background in a supporting role, you know, particularly where David, her husband, is concerned, as he and they live with Parkinson's. And so it was just a delight. It was just a delight. It always is in church when somebody volunteers to do anything, to be honest. And so I was so pleased. And she's going to tell us a bit of her story. And she's just told me that it's a story of the faithfulness of God since the very beginning. Now I'm pretty sure that's not when Adam was a lad, but I'm pretty sure she'll tell us. So when's the beginning for you, Cheryl?
So the beginning for me is in 1965 when
Okay.
a school friend asked me if I would like to go and see her be baptized. And I said yes. And I was so amazed at the kind of church she went to that I went back and back until I became a Christian later in that year.
Okay, so that's really interesting, isn't it? Because it started with an invitation.
Yes.
It didn't start with a gospel presentation. She didn't witness to you in the traditional sense of the term. She just said, "Hey, would you fancy coming along and seeing?" And you did.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, really good. And you know, forgive me for saying this, but you're not 15 any longer, are you?
No, not
So,
anymore. Not
so,
anymore. In my head, sometimes I think it, but
oh
when you
yeah,
said
yeah.
about Adam, I think probably my children think I was, a lot.
And you know, it's funny, isn't it? Because you're right. I mean, there are days when I feel like that, and then days when I feel like I am Adam's
Yes.
brother. But hey, so tell us some of the faithful moments. Tell us some of the highlights along the way, because you have faithfully followed, well, I'm assuming this, from that moment to
Mm,
this. Tell us
mm,
about that.
I have. And I think listening last night to Lucky's story, I'd already written this list of things I wanted to share, but listening to his story made me see that although I probably wasn't as purposeful seeking steps as he was, it really has been a story of steps, of God putting me in situations that has changed the way I was thinking and then has led to something else. So in 1966, I went to a summer youth camp on the Gower, and a man called David Cable was speaking there, who was a missionary in South America. And he spoke about the crucifixion, and I can remember it so vividly now. But at that time, I really felt that God wanted me to go abroad to work,
Okay.
and it didn't happen straight away. I'd always wanted to be a maths teacher, so much so that my dolls would be lined up and be taught maths day after day. And I was 17. I got my place at teacher training college, as it was then, and thought this was it. I then had a diagnosis of epilepsy.
Okay.
And in those days, you weren't allowed in a classroom with epilepsy. So all of a sudden, in my upper sixth year at school, I had to rethink. And I can't even tell you how it came about, but I went into orthoptics, and it was a great job, but it was the term was like, what is that then? So it really is an optometrist sort of based at the National Health. It was a lot more interesting, I think, because you saw all sorts of different reasons that people would come into the hospital that affected their eyes. And so that's what I did. And they assured me and my parents that they were quite happy that I would never be alone in the clinic anyway. And and so that's what I did. And it was never a problem. Um, when I graduated, I went to work in Burton on Trent, but there was still this very, very strong desire to go abroad to work. Um, my husband and I, my first husband, Paul, and I married in 1972, and he had the same desire as me. So we really sought the Lord to see what is it you want us to do. And India was the
Okay.
recurring country, whether it by people we spoke to or books that we read or a real certainty. And so in 1975, we went to a place in the Nilgiri Hills called Uti. Utakamandalam is the name, but Uti is what it's always called. And we went to work at a school for missionaries' children. Paul was a geography teacher, and I wasn't a maths teacher, but I was a house parent, which I absolutely loved. India changed my life forever. I think I've never been the same since. While I was there, I had two of my children, which probably is a story for another time. And I was also healed of epilepsy when I was there.
Wow.
India really brought the Bible to life. You know, when you saw the oxen in the fields, you knew they couldn't be unequally yoked. Lots of things made it real. And so that's where we were. We lived there for 10 years. We decided it was the right time to come home. You know, you just get that unsettling feeling, well, I do anyway, from God, that there's a change coming.
Okay, let's pause for a moment, because that's you've just gone straight over some really interesting things there.
Yes.
Yeah, isn't it interesting how God calls by planting a seed that takes some time to mature? In a way, it matures as we mature in our faith.
Yes.
And that's always really interesting to me, you know, and in some ways he uses that time really to refine us, doesn't he? To refine our understanding of our calling, because, you know, you could have become a maths teacher. And and you look at the way that God works, and we like to think that God works in a nice straight line, but he doesn't, does he?
No.
You know, I mean, somebody said the Sunday before last in church, I fully expect God's doing such a great work in my life, but he didn't start where I expected him to. And it's true, isn't it?
Yes.
So that was really interesting. And then you skipped very quickly over, I was healed of epilepsy.
Yes.
Just briefly tell us a little bit about that, because epilepsy is not something that you tend to get over once you've got it.
No, it's not. And it was one of those things that wasn't that acceptable. So seemingly, I had been having fits for a while, but my mum didn't tell anybody.
Okay.
And so it wasn't until I was 17 and in the physics lab that I had a fit. So I remember after the event that my physics teacher took me home and waited until my mum was there. And then she spoke to mum and dad, and then I had the diagnosis, and then it happened from there. And it was epilepsy is quite difficult to control in the beginning. It takes quite a long time to get the right medication.
Yeah.
And so when we wanted to go to India, I realized that it had taken a long time for this medication to settle me and for me to feel more confident that I was well controlled. And so we got permission to take 4 years supply of this medication with us. And so it was quite a tricky time. I had difficulty with having a baby, and that was partly the medication.
Yeah.
And so when I found out that I was expecting Hannah, it was still very much holding your breath. And on the day, one of the days that I was feeling quite unwell, a lovely, lovely Indian doctor that came up from the plains. She wasn't particularly Jew. They must have told her at the school what was the matter. So she came to see me straight away. Dr. Param Jyoti was her name, and she was lovely. And she'd dealt with this kind of thing before and started giving or suggested that I had injections, which is what I did, but also 5 months bed rest. So you can imagine I found that tricky.
Okay.
Yes. But the outcome was Hannah, and so how could I ever not want to do that? And so once that was over, she recommended that we waited a while and just get my body settled down. And then when Hannah was 1, I was reading a book by Catherine Marshall called Something More,
Okay.
just reading it while she was asleep. And I just felt that God had healed me. I wasn't even particularly praying about it. I just knew that I knew.
Okay.
But that was very difficult because I knew that I knew. I knew that if I checked it out with Paul or with Rosalie, who was the school nurse, they would be very anxious
Yes.
and they would, it wasn't fair for them to take that responsibility that I knew I had to take. So I decided to flush all the tablets down the toilet
4 years
because,
worth.
yeah, well, it was 2 years by then, so
Okay.
it
Okay.
wasn't so bad. I just knew that I
Wow.
didn't want
Okay.
I didn't want any crutch. I didn't want to be able
Yeah.
to, and so from that day to this, I've never ever had any symptoms of epilepsy
Okay.
since then. It
Wow.
was
So
just
at what point did you tell them?
well, well, I was going to broach it at some stage, after I'd perhaps checked it a bit, but I didn't realize that they were capsules. So they
Okay.
floated.
Okay.
So when Paul came back from work, I had to tell him
Right.
then.
Okay.
And then we
Okay.
fished them all out and sorted, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but I just knew it had to
Wow.
be my decision
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
God
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
not anybody else's.
But that's fascinating, isn't it? Because it's that knowing that you know and acting upon it, that's faith, isn't it? That's
Yes.
faith as in, to do something active, to, faith put into practice. That's really interesting. Yeah, wow. Okay, sorry, I interrupted. So
No, not
where next?
so. So when we had this unsettling feeling and we knew
Mm,
that God was leading
yeah.
us to something different, we actually fully expected and wanted it to be in another part of the world. We didn't
Okay.
particularly feel we wanted to come back to Cardiff, but that wasn't what God had planned. And there was a place then in Dinas Powys that we had prayed with the people that bought it, that needed a lot of help. So this was somewhere we came back to. And I just think God was so kind in bringing us back to a place like that with lots of grounds, big building, so that then the children had been used to running free on the compound in India.
Yeah.
And so it was quite similar. It wasn't too much of a shock. So we lived at Hebron Hall for a while
Okay.
and did lots of things. We also then had lots of the boys that we had in the dorm in India were coming up through to
Mm,
university and through GCSEs, and so we had lots of them to come and stay with us, and we were parents in the UK for them,
mm, yeah.
and that was a wonderful opportunity again, just breaking me in gently to UK life, that I could be comfortable with something that I'd been doing for the previous 10 years.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And
Uh,
did you find re-entry? Because when you are embedded in a place like India, culturally there's a culture shock on the way out. But
yes,
then 3 years, how long were you there?
10 years.
10 years. Ten
Yes,
years, and then you come back, and you
yes,
sort of assume that you're going to pick up and everything will be like it was when you left, but things move on. Was there a
yes.
culture shock on the way back?
There was more of a culture shock on the
Okay.
way back
Yeah,
than the
interesting.
way there.
Yeah.
Just, oh, you'd walk into a supermarket and there was all this food. And, we had rations of rice.
Yes.
Food
Yeah.
was very difficult. And water, the friends of ours had got this house ready for us at in Hebron Hall, Dinas Powys. The tap was dripping in the kitchen. And the first thing Paul did was go and try and turn the tap off. And then he didn't. So I went. And there was a reunion a few months back at Hebron Hall, and these friends said, we we understood why you both went to turn the tap off, but the drip seemed more important than the rest of the house.
Yes.
And we'd been rationed with
Yeah,
water,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
so the plenty and the
Yes.
extravagance, I don't think I've ever actually
No.
got used to that.
Yeah, yeah,
Not
yeah.
really.
I remember years ago being in the Heath Evangelical Church, and they had a missionary that had been a career missionary, so 30, 40 years, really not coming back to the UK,
No.
and retired back to the UK. And Vernon Hyam asked her, what's the biggest thing that you've noticed that's different? And she said, you deny yourselves nothing.
Yes.
And man, it was like somebody punched me in the stomach.
Yeah.
What an indictment! That unbelievable. Yeah. Wow.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So a season in Hebron Hall.
All. Yes. And then again, we had this unsettling
Yeah.
feeling and felt that it was perhaps time for the children to have their own front door.
Okay.
And so that's what we did. We moved around the corner, still in Dinas Powers, because they're at school there
Yeah.
by this time. And so again, just the kindness and the faithfulness of God in knowing He knew the next step.
Mm.
We didn't know the next step. But, as I said about Lucky, it was so helpful. Like, thank you, Father. You led us from Hebron Hall, which was a great place to
Yeah.
start, to having our own front door. And not too long after that, Paul got cancer
Okay.
and died.
Oh
And
wow.
so the the fact that everything was in place, we had all the insurances and things that we hadn't had before, life
Right.
insurance and the mortgage covered, and just in the kindness of God and His
Okay.
timing, it left me in a place that I didn't have to worry too much, because
Yeah.
we had our own house and the children were familiar with it.
Yeah.
And so just God's hand in that.
And
Um,
how old were the kids, and how many did you have by then?
we had three. Hannah was
Okay.
17, James was 14, and Seth was 11.
Okay. Okay. So they weren't very, very young,
No,
but
no,
it's a traumatic time regardless, isn't it?
regardless.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
And yes. And so before, actually, I've left a step out, which was really interesting.
Yeah.
One of the children's friends worked in adult education, and they were desperate for a maths teacher.
Hey.
And so one of the children said, "Oh, my mum likes maths." So he was very excited. And so I started doing a few sessions in night school,
Okay.
teaching, which was wonderful. I always thought it was teaching. You could teach somebody and they could do maths. But I learned there was one man wanted to be a postman and just needed some
Yeah.
understanding of
Yeah.
order of letters.
Yeah.
Another man wanted to be a carpenter. So I absolutely loved that. And so whilst I was there, I was given the opportunity to do a postgrad teaching certificate.
Okay.
So I thought, why not? So I did.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a while,
Okay.
and then that was actually just before Paul died. So
Yeah.
I was doing that. I was home with the children in the day, and then
Mm.
the night school, and then just after that, I was offered a job in the friary in the centre of town, which again was maths teaching, but um, all sorts of across the board people would come in, and then interestingly enough, they rang me from the hospital one day to say, "We've been given extra funding for an orthoptic post. Are you interested?" And I wasn't really, because I loved doing what I did. But anyway, I thought about it and we prayed about it. And then one day when I was coming home in front of the castle, I said, "Father, I just don't know what to do." And he said, "Whatever you choose, I will bless you in."
Okay.
And I thought, that's no help, really.
Nice
So,
of you. Nice of you,
yeah.
Lord, but I wanted you to make the decision.
So anyway, went back and did a few sessions at the hospital, and I loved that as well.
Okay.
So actually, that was what I decided to do.
Yeah.
And again, God's hand in it all was the
Mm.
fact that it was salaried and paid
Yeah.
holiday, paid sick, and it was what I needed then
Yeah, it gave you
to.
stability in terms of the
Yes,
family, didn't it? At a time
yes,
of uncertainty. Yeah,
yes.
absolutely.
So so I did go back to orthoptics and stayed there then till I retired. Um,
Okay.
but whilst I was there, my boss, the consultant I worked with, was involved in a charity called Orbis. It's not a
Okay.
Christian charity,
No.
but it's great. Um, they invite doctors, orthoptists, whatever, to go to different places and teach and train for a
Okay.
couple of weeks rather than just do lots and lots of treatment.
Mm.
And so, because my boss and I got on well, and he knew how I worked, and he took me with him. So we went to Bangladesh and to India and Vietnam and to China, and I was just so amazed that I managed to get the other thing that I thought was lost. When we came back from India, Paul and I always said we would love to go back once the children had grown.
Mm.
And of course, I thought then when he died, oh, that's not going to happen now.
Yeah.
But in writing all this list, the two things that I thought were lost, that was maths teaching and
Mm.
India, I found God brought back to me in a way
Yeah.
that was so unexpected. And it just, so that path is still going along
Yeah, it's
quite
interesting, isn't
nicely.
it? It reminds me of that verse that says God delights to give us the desire of our hearts.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and it's interesting to see the path and how it's woven together. That's
Yeah.
really interesting. Yeah,
Yes.
very good. Very good.
Yes.
Yeah.
And and um and so the orthoptics, they then needed a lecturer. We also lectured at the university, which is how I knew Lucky, in orthoptics in the third year. And because I had my postgrad teaching certificate,
Yeah.
I was able to lecture. So another thing I never ever imagined doing, but I loved that as well. So just all neatly tied
Yeah,
together.
yeah. Very
Yes.
good.
So this was okay, and the kids were growing up, and the teenage years I was in the car more than I was in the house,
Always.
but they were worth it. And in my previous church at that time, then we were encouraged to write our own tract, a story that we could keep in our bags, that we could hand out if people were interested to know how our walk with God was.
Mm.
And I put off writing it. I really didn't want to write the part of my story that said, my beloved husband died. But I decided I needed to. I sat down to write, and I wrote the story, much of what I've told you. And um, my pen ran out of ink just as I wrote, my beloved husband died. And God said to me, you can stop here, or you can go and get a new pen and continue. So I went and got a new pen and continued. And then 6 weeks later, I met David.
Okay. Okay.
So just,
Okay. Really interesting.
yeah,
Because I mean, the fact is that so many people in the trauma of that situation never get past it.
oh,
From that moment on, their entire life is dictated and determined by what has happened in the past,
yes,
and everything is coloured by that. And yet, that's an amazing moment, isn't it?
yes,
Get a new
yes,
pen. There's a new
yes,
chapter coming. Is really
yes,
interesting. Yeah.
yes.
Wow. Wow.
And that was about 10 years after Paul had died.
Yeah.
And it's not any experience that you'd want anybody to go through,
No.
but but again, God was just faithful. My ups and my downs, he was there with a person or with something that had
Yeah.
happened,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
just to encourage me, like you said, that there is still a new story to write, and it
Yes.
in no way detracts from my life with Paul and all that we did
No. No.
before.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
That, and
And
that's
and
what.
if I remember rightly, David was an in-law. Is that right? Was he really?
No,
Oh,
no,
okay, okay.
Oh, I didn't know David at all.
Right.
His daughter was in Cardiff
Yes.
and he'd studied, and
Okay.
because my children were in the youth group and Hannah was at university as well,
Right.
we got to know her quite well. And then she started going out with my son James's best friend,
Okay.
who was
Okay.
also called David.
Yes.
So Sadie and Dave I knew very well,
Yeah.
and she didn't want to get married at home because her mum wasn't there.
Yeah.
And so she got married in Cardiff, and I helped organise the wedding.
Okay.
And then at the wedding, she said, my dad
Right.
would like to say thank you.
Okay.
And I thought, hang on a minute here now. So, but anyway, we had lots in common. Linda died
Yeah.
with similar, the children were similar ages. So
Yes.
we had swap notes for a while.
Yeah. And
Mm.
I mean, because we've only known you a brief amount of time, those of us that do know you, uh, we we cannot see David other than how he is now.
No,
He's not lived with Parkinson's all your married life, has he?
no. Well,
No.
he
Right.
has, but the
Yeah.
first 10 years probably didn't impact us
Okay.
that much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. When we first got married, he wasn't well. It
Yeah.
took me a while to realize he kept tripping on the right hand side.
Okay.
But he
Okay.
wasn't, yeah, he wasn't well.
Okay.
And so it took quite a while, but I just knew there was something wrong. And
Yeah.
then finally we got the diagnosis.
Yeah.
Again, once the medication started, it was
Yeah.
just gone. It was no there weren't any
Yeah.
symptoms at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Although in the doctor's wait, in the surgery when we had the diagnosis, we did look at each other and think, oh, Father, I thought we'd done this. We
Yes.
thought we'd done illness, but this is a different one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yet the faithfulness of God in that previous
Yes,
chapter, you can see how it prepares you for the next one, doesn't it?
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
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 Wow.
So,
Okay.
but in the as I said, it didn't impact us at all. So the nice thing was that David was able to come with me when I went with Orbis,
Okay.
because we paid his airfare, but you always got double rooms, so it
Mm.
was fine. So it was quite nice because my boss's wife came then as well, so they
Okay.
went enjoying themselves while we went to work.
Yeah.
And I will just tell you this, that when you go with Orbis, Virgin Airlines, if there's any spaces in first class, let mission workers have them.
Oh,
So
yes.
I went first class several times. And although I share everything with David, not first class travel, he had to stay. He had to stay, as he says, in the galley.
Yeah.
Oh,
Good. As long as he
yes,
knows his place, that's the main thing.
yes, yes. So I think, again, and some of the things I said, and I mean, some of the things that when he first knew me, he couldn't quite work out why. I had a great thing about waste and
Yeah.
not needing this and not needing that, and those were just India days.
Yes.
So when he came with me, then, particularly to when we went to Guwahati, which is in Assam, the lady consultant there was a Christian, and so we were able to spend quite a bit of time with her, and we really saw India then, and so I was really pleased
Mm.
that he saw that.
Yeah.
That it
Fantastic.
shaped me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So all the way through, the thing that you trace through your life experience is the
Yeah.
faithfulness of God.
Yes. Absolutely.
Not
Absolutely.
not the traumas necessarily and the challenges, but actually the way that God was in it all.
Mm.
Okay.
Mm.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, here you are now. You've moved closer to home in terms of church.
Yes.
And in some ways, that I think that's God blessing us more than He's blessing you,
Oh
really.
no.
But
Absolutely no.
it's really interesting because I remember the first time that I met both of you and we had a chat and David's principal concern was that the measure of freedom it would give you, the ability to actually get involved and to do things and to have a church around the corner and the support that therefore offers. And that was important to him
Yeah.
at the time. But in terms of, you're settling with us, how have you found us? What do you feel in terms of,
Well,
being
I
settled,
think I
etc.?
meant, I think, well, again, COVID, it was a funny time. We were
It really
shielding.
was. Yeah.
But in that, again, before COVID, there was an unsettling.
Yeah.
And in fact, the January 2020, we'd spoken to two of our elders and said that this was perhaps something that we were thinking of. And then,
Mm.
of course, COVID came and everything went out of the window.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
it also meant, because I hadn't been to church, or we hadn't been to church physically, it was a
Yeah.
really kind of break, if you
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
from from a church that I've been involved with a long time, and
Yes.
had certainly blessed our family with
Yeah.
with all that we've done there, um, and yet it was the right time.
Yeah.
So that some of the things that I thought I would find strange, God had already broken that tie,
Yeah.
and so how have I found you all? I think we just love being with you. We love um, we love the variety. We
There
love
is.
the inclusiveness. We love the graciousness of your ministry. And we, like you said, it hasn't been very long, but we very much feel at home there.
That's good. That's
And
good.
I think I mentioned to you a few beginning of September, I went to a celebration of a friend that had died in August's life. And it was in All Nations, and my daughter came with me and a friend the other side in case I would be upset,
Yeah.
just with all the memories. I wasn't. I
Okay.
just felt that it was again this path that God has taken me on,
Yes.
that He has never ever not been faithful.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
didn't feel it
absolutely.
like an us and a them. I just felt this was the path that I'm on now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, very good.
Mm.
And that's really helpful. That's really helpful. And in many respects, it's illustrative of what Lucky was talking about last
Yeah.
week. And that's really helpful because, he was so passionate and so clear and so challenging in lots of ways.
Yes.
But it's really nice to hear somebody who sort of is looking on their life and going, actually, in a more gentle way than maybe is happening with Lucky with his sort of, cut and
Yeah.
thrust and, all that sort of stuff. It still illustrates the same principles. It illustrates, that God has a plan for our lives. And even
Yes.
though there are times when we don't quite know how it fits together,
Yeah.
as you've described it, you've talked about it weaving itself together. The maths and
Yes.
the eye stuff, and
Yes.
it's really interesting, really
Yeah.
interesting. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much. That's really good, and it's nice to hear from you. I almost said for a change because you are
Yeah.
the quieter one of the two, and and I'm always conscious of the thing that David said a little while ago when he said, forgive me if I feel like you feel like I'm repeating myself, but I haven't got a lot of time. There's
Yeah.
an urgency, isn't there, for David?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I appreciate that, but
Yeah.
we appreciate you. And I don't mean we appreciate
Yeah.
you as a couple. I mean
Yeah.
we appreciate you as an individual. Because I think James, we've got a guy in the church called James, and he's from Nigeria, and we see an awful lot of James. And every time I see him, he goes, "Hello, hello, Pastor." And I go, "How's Oluwabumbi, his
Yeah.
wife?" And I think I get the distinct impression he's slightly confused as to why I'm more interested
Yeah.
in her
Yeah.
because we don't
Yeah.
see her,
No.
But yeah. So no, it's good.
Yeah.
Thank you.